Moscow. A list of senior Kremlin officials and rich Russians published by the American government constituted an unprecedented situation that basically amounted to creating a list of enemies of the United States, the Kremlin said Tuesday. The reaction from Moscow came after the Trump administration, adhering to a demand from Congress, released a list of 210 people who were identified because of their closeness to the Russian regime, but said it would not impose new sanctions on those named. Dmitry S. Peskov, the spokesman for President Vladimir Putin, told reporters that the Kremlin would analyze the list before deciding on a response to what the Russians called the Kremlin report. The Trump administration seemed to suggest that everyone on the list was an enemy of the United States, Mr. Peskov said, although the document itself said their inclusion on the list did not mean they were involved in malign activities. De facto everyone is called the enemy of the United States, Mr. Peskov told reporters. If you read the text and the title of this document, all this is done in accordance with the law on countering the enemies of the United States. Government figures on the list include more than 40 of Mr. Putin's closest advisors, all 30 members of the Cabinet of Ministers, including Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, the heads of many important state agencies and state-run companies, the mayor of Moscow, and the governor of St. Petersburg. Perhaps the most prominent senior government official who did not appear on the list was the central bank governor, Elvira Nabiullina. The 96 oligarchs on the roster were those Russians worth more than $1 billion, according to the introduction to the document. The list was met with a combination of disbelief and derision in Russia, with mocking comments ricocheting around social media. Some joked that it had taken the Trump administration 6 months to photocopy the Forbes list of Russian billionaires, since they were all included, as well as the list of senior officials on the Kremlin website. The list looks like the book Who's Who in Russian Politics. Arkady Dvorkovich, a deputy prime minister who was included on the list, was quoted as saying by the Interfax news agency. Like many, he shrugged it off as a list of names. There is no need for action now. Other politicians said that their inclusion on the list was a sign that they were doing a good job. The list was prepared after the United States Congress, responding to evidence of Russian hacking and other meddling in the 2016 American presidential election, passed a law in August demanding that the Trump administration prepare within 6 months a detailed report on senior political figures and wealthy businessmen in Russia. As noted in the introduction to the list, no sanctions were imposed on those named. The announcement also said there were more names on an unpublished annex provided by the Department of the Treasury, including lesser officials or businessmen worth less than $1 billion. The unfocused nature of the list was likely to create more than a little head-scratching. It could provide additional fuel to those who consider President Trump beholden to Russia, since its purpose was unclear and it did not single out any person or single entity for additional sanctions. The law also limited Mr. Trump's ability to ease current sanctions without a congressional review. Mr. Trump called the law seriously flawed when he signed it in August, and Russia initially reacted by forcing the United States Embassy in Moscow to slash its staff. On Tuesday, Mr. Peskov said that at the very least the list could harm the reputations of all those included. The fact that this list was made public can potentially do damage to the image and reputation of our enterprises, businessmen, politicians, and officials, he said. It is quite unprecedented that such a broad list of the highest-ranking members of the Russian leadership was published.